It's August 30th, 1997. We're in Columbus, Ohio at the 12th Armored Division reunion. It's the 51st one. I'm Charlie Henson, and I'm interviewing Wilton B. Svensk.
W.
Wilton W. Svensk.
Svensk.
Svensk. Okay. Would you give me your full name and where you were born and where you were born?
Well, my name is Wilton Waldemar Svensk, and I was born in Stacy, Minnesota. That's 60 miles north of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And what year and date of
Oh,
your birth?
January 4th, 1921. Was born on a farm. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about it.
Okay. Tell me about your mom, where she came from, what was her name before she married?
Well, my mother, she was born in 1895, just about 38 miles north of Minneapolis at a place called Springvale. And her mother died in childbirth, so her father couldn't take care of a baby. He already had a 5-year-old child, and he was a lumberjack, so he headed west in the lumber company, a country in Washington and Oregon. And so then he had this friend in Springvale that he knew from Sweden, so they adopted my mother, so she was adopted, and her name was Carlson then. And so then, and she died when she was 56 years old. She was in an automobile accident. Her spleen got busted up, and she wound up with cancer. And my dad, he was born in Sweden, and he died at the age of 47 in 1940. And he had a gallbladder operation, and in those days they gave you ether for the operation, and he died of double ether pneumonia because he was a very powerful, strong man, but he had been fighting this for so long that he just had no strength left to fight. And so I was 18 years old then when he died. And
what was his name?
His name was Hjalmer, Hjlmer, and Theodore Svensk. Anyway, he came over to this country, I think it was when he was about 19 years old. And when he came to this country, he was a friend of the Carlsons that adopted my mother. So that's where he came, and that's where he met my mother. But we moved away from there. He was a construction foreman for a W.C. Olson iron and steel ornamental outfit, and he traveled all over the country. So they bought a farm out in between what they call Stacy and North Branch, and that's where I was born. And then we moved to town when I was 5 years old. I started school in Minneapolis, and the schools are no longer there. They've been torn down, but one of them has anyway, and called Prescott School, grade school. And then went to Edison High School. I graduated in 1939. And that's,
When you think of your mom and dad,
do I think of them?
when you think of them and you think about what they wanted to teach you, is there one theme that runs through what they wanted you to be or encouraged you to be?
Well, I don't know if they encouraged us to be anything outside of just a good citizen. He was concerned about, he came from Sweden, so he learned to talk English perfectly, and wanted us to be Americans. You know, that's, he never talked Swede in the house unless he didn't want us to understand him. Then he spoke Swede, but we all understood Swede, so. But anyway, it's, my dad was like I said, he stood about 6 foot tall. He was a powerful man, steel worker and lumberjack. And I think he was disappointed in his 2 sons. I have one brother that's 2 years younger than me. And we weren't rough and tumble, so. And he was. My sisters, I can remember they would bring in some young man they had met. And the first thing he'd say, let's wrestle. And I never knew whether they came over to wrestle with him or to see my sisters.
How many children were in your family? And tell me in order of birth, what their names
Well,
are.
there was 6. And my brother and I were in the middle. I had 2 older sisters that are now dead. There was Hilda and then Signa, and then I was next. And then my brother Glenn. And he's just about as nice a brother as I could ask for. And then I had 2 younger sisters, Vi and Jeannie. They're both still living. And so they're waiting for me to die. So I'm the next in line. So and age-wise. So, and but I can't complain about anything. My life was good. I knew my family loved me, and I was. They couldn't feed me during the Depression years, so every summer they used to have to farm me out on the farm so I could work for my room and board, because I ate as much as 3 grown men. Yeah, so had 3 suppers every night before I could get filled up. Yeah.
What did you do on the farms? Just general work, or did you?
Oh yeah, just milk the cows, run the horses, and ate chicken 3 times a day. And in those days, everybody, they would buy a bunch of chickens, and then they'd cull them out, and all the roosters, and they'd start eating when they got the size of pigeons. So we ate chicken 3 times a day. So. And my favorite food today is chicken. So that's the way it goes.
Tell me about what you did after high school and what got you to, and then lead us into your Army days.
Well, when I got out of high school, see, I graduated in 1939, and I did some odd jobs. I worked in a place that made spreaders that spread poison for grasshoppers, and then I drove a truck and hauled potatoes for 9 months. And then 1940, when my dad died, then a friend of his was a foreman in a sash and window company, and he asked me if I needed work. So then I had applied in the bank, and I got called in the bank, but his job offered me twice as much money. So I stayed there until I went into service in 1942. So, and I was drafted. I didn't volunteer because I had 2 sisters and a brother, and a mother to feed. So, but then if I figured that I better go in when they drafted me, otherwise if I applied for deferment, they would take my brother out of school, and because he was 18 then. So, but then when I went in, then he figured that he should go in too. So we both were, and he went in the Navy, and I was in the Army. And I went in to Fort Snelling, and I knew one of the regular Army guys in Fort Snelling, and so when I was there about a week probably, and I got my assignment, and it said the Armored Division. That didn't mean anything to me, so I asked him. Well, it didn't mean anything to him either. So, and the Armored Divisions at that time were something new, so then I was sent to Camp Campbell as a filler for the only thing that was there when I got there was a cattery. And so I was in when the division started until I got injured. But as far as desiring to go in the Army, I didn't want to go, but I mean, I figured it was my place to go, so that's.
Tell me what it was like when you got to Camp Campbell.
Pardon?
What it was like for you when you got to Camp Campbell, how you felt.
It wasn't finished yet.
Oh.
They were still working on it when we got there. But so there was new buildings. I mean, it wasn't bad. As far as the camp was concerned, the only thing that seemed to bother me there was it was clay, the soil, and it was red. And the ground, when you walked on it, was spongy. But when you walked on it, the dust from the top would curl up, go up as far as your knees, you know. And I couldn't understand that, where the ground was spongy and still had dust on top of it. But we went. I took basic training then in Camp Campbell, and then they sent me to Armored Force School. I mean the gunnery school in Fort Knox. So I went down there and graduated from there, and then I came back and I was a gunner in a tank.
When did you go to Fort Knox?
When?
When?
Let's see, it would have been in 1943, I think, the early part of 43.
So did you go on the Tennessee maneuvers after you went to school, or did you get...
That was after, yeah. And then we, at Camp Campbell, and it seemed like I got into everything there. I wound up spending a lot of time trying to teach people from New York and all over that had never been inside a car or anything to drive a truck. And then I spent time on the firing range teaching people to use machine guns, and I laid alongside of them for weeks at a time. And I couldn't hear anything for a month after I got off the firing range. And then they had me working in the gas tents, and I worked with tear gas and everything.
In the what, gas tents?
Gas tents, yeah.
Tell me what that is. I've never heard of that.
And, well, that was sometime in 1943. I don't remember when these things happened, but they had big tents. And then we'd fill them with gas, tear gas. And then the GIs would have to come in and without a gas mask on, and then put the gas mask on inside of the tent so they'd know how to use a gas mask. And then when next one, they'd come in with the gas mask on and then take it off and then go out of the tent. So I smelled like tear gas all the time, and everybody avoided me. Come in the mess hall, and they'd all move down the other end. So and I wound up on different details. I think it must have been a troublemaker, I think, or something, but I wound up as a prison chaser, they called it.
Okay, I don't know prison chaser. Tell me what that is.
A prison chaser? Well, we'd be on prison chaser for a week, and we would, in full dress uniform in the summertime, we'd carry a Thompson machine gun with a full load of ammunition, 50 rounds of ammunition, and it seemed like it weighed a ton. And we would guard a prisoner, and then we had to read about the prisoner, know all about him, and we had to make sure that he stayed out of reach because he had a rake in his hand and he could swing and hit you in the head, so we had to stay back far enough to keep away from him. And we only became a prison chaser, our company had to furnish one, if we had somebody in the guardhouse. And we had one guy that was always in the guardhouse.
Was it the same guy all the time?
Yeah, well, he was. Well, we had others too, but he was there just about all the time, and we would have to double time every place you went. You had to double time. Well, they're kind of bad. The prisoner, he was in a pair of fatigues, and he was nice and cool. Didn't bother him, but we were in full dress, and then we'd come in at night, and then he'd be locked up, and then we'd have to wash all our clothes, and so we were in full dress uniform in the morning again, and it was probably one of the worst details I had, I guess. And then the reason I got to be a prison chaser, because I'd had a 3-day pass. And usually after you've had prison chasing for a week, then they give you a 3-day pass. But the first sergeant, he said, you've had your 3-day pass, now we'll put you on prison chaser. But, so as far as the other ones, in the beginning I had my share of KP, I guess, washing pots and pans, and after then got to be the gunner in a tank, then I was a corporal, then I didn't do those things, then they weren't supposed to do it, but if I draw a detail, they put me on guard duty, corporal of the guard. So, but that wasn't bad. That I didn't mind that. But we rode around in a Jeep then. So, but anyway, it's but it was an experience. I'm not sorry that I got it, but I would never want to live through it again. It's one of those things and that, then we went to the Smokies Mountains for maneuvers, and that was kind of interesting. Then they had a brush fire while we were there and almost burned us out. When you're going to wash clothes there's a mountain stream, and you'd jump in clothes, shoes and all, and then start washing everything and then taking it off. And when you get down to the skin, you were just blue from the cold. I thought we'd all get pneumonia, but we were 21 years of age, or that you were in the prime of your life, and we didn't get sick that much. And I was sick, I guess, about a little over a week. I was in the hospital with my throat. What do you call it? Strep throat. And that, I think that was the only time that I was hospitalized in the first part of the stateside here. So I don't know what else. These are the people that I met there, are the people that I've kept in contact with all the years, and I still do, although they're not here now. I mean, and at this reunion, they're not here because none of the ones from B Company, this is what I trained with, was B Company, the 23rd. But then when I got injured, I was with A Company, with Lieutenant Coslow's platoon. And so it's, I was trying to think of what else. The other was just regular Army. I mean, played cards, went to the USO. Nobody had any money. I got $4 a month. Everything went home that I made, so couldn't get into too much trouble that way. We had a platoon sergeant, though, by the name of Cornelia, and his wife was a singer in Nashville. And so we were real close to Nashville, so then every Saturday night he'd line up the whole platoon and march us into Nashville to hear his wife singing. That was nice.
On your maneuvers, were you already driving a tank?
Pardon?
On the maneuvers, you said, up in the mountains?
Well, I didn't drive a tank. I wasn't a driver.
Oh.
Nobody wanted to ride with me. I was a vicious tank driver. I did have a license, though, but...
Why were you a vicious tank driver?
Well, I never can get the hang of tank driving. It's not like a steering wheel. You have two levers, and the tank weighs 33 ton. And when you would make a turn, you'd pull on the lever, and this one side will lift up, you know. And I didn't like the way it feels, so then I'd straighten it out, it'd plop down, and I'd go down the ditch and come up on the other side. So it's, I never was a real good tank driver. Well, I could drive it, yeah, but usually drove the Jeeps or the trucks. I didn't mind the Jeep, but I didn't like driving a truck and a convoy. That was a miserable job.
Why was that miserable?
Well, most of the time we were driving, it'd be raining, and in those days you didn't have the equipment like it is today on a car or a truck. You had to have your head out the window. That's why I wound up in the hospital. I was on a driving truck with my head out the window trying to see where I'm going, and raining and cold, and then I wound up with a strep throat there. But, of course, that was in Kentucky, you know. When we got in Texas, it was different.
Tell me about the first day of when you got to Abilene, Texas. Tell me about your impressions and
well, I don't
what
know if
that
I
was like.
remember the first day. I guess we looked around, and after living in the barracks, at the brand new barracks like we had in Camp Campbell, Texas was a little different. They were these plywood housing with a little ash can stove in it, and it did get cold there once in a while. The first impression, I see all of these buildings are all a lot of plywood, and it's going into a tent city, and but it was just another place as far as that goes. I mean, to me, an army camp is an army camp. They didn't impress me really one way or the other with it. I guess I probably liked Abilene better than I did Camp Campbell, really, in a way. Of course, then all my basic training was over and everything, so Army life was a little different then. So it's, and I liked Abilene as a town. We'd go in our, seemed to be our favorite place was to go. We'd go on a weekend on a Sunday, and we'd go to the Baptist church, and one of the guys belonged to the Baptist church, and he'd take us with him. And we liked that because they had the baptismal right above the altar on there, and there was glass in the front, and we could watch the baptisms up there. And they would these tanks of water, and you could see the water waving in there like on the Nile, and then they'd dunk them. We'd sit there and we'd like, that was like watching a movie. So we liked Abilene real well, but it's, most of the time we didn't have money to go in, so we went to the USO where it didn't cost us anything. So.
Was the training different there than at Campbell? Was it a different level of training?
Yeah, we didn't have the basic training anymore there. You still have, your calisthenics in the morning and all of this, but, and then it was a little different. Then we went down to El Paso as a unit and went back in the hills from there. We marched back in the hills and did anti-aircraft firing with our 50 caliber machine guns. And so that was a little different. You were shooting at live targets. A plane up there was pulling a target, and he'd be pulling it until somebody got a little bit too ambitious and started aiming at him instead of the target. then he'd quit flying. But, or if they saw an armadillo running across, and everybody had to shoot at the armadillo. This type of thing. There was one thing about GIs, they always found a way to entertain themselves. They always found a way to make liquor so they had something to drink. And this type of thing, you know. But they were, an American soldier was ingenious in most ways. Probably that's what helped them when they got overseas. The Germans knew what we were supposed to be doing, and but we never did what we were supposed to be doing. So we confused them. But it was an experience that I think it's probably be good for all young people. You know, it's my son John. He went through it with the Air Force and after the war, but then during Vietnam area. But then my youngest son, he never. He was too young then. When he got old enough to be in the draft, there was no draft. And no place to go. So, but
So were you in the 23rd all through Barclay, or did they had? Okay, they
from the day it started.
Okay.
No,
And
see,
now
in the beginning we were regiments. See, in Camp Campbell, that was H Company, and that's and we then they found out that this system didn't work good. That battalions was better than regiments, and I can't remember now when we changed over to the 23rd. That should be in the record someplace, but and then we got, so when I got to Texas, and the crew that we had in Texas, that's a crew that we went overseas with. See? So it's
Did when you think back on the guys that were in the 23rd at Barclay, maybe let's say your squad, did most of you make it through the war?
It was a patrol, or platoon.
Platoon?
Yeah, platoon, yeah, not a patrol, platoon. It's the squads were the infantry, so, but there was
Tell me the difference there. Explain the difference there. You just said it was a squad in the infantry.
Well, a squad would be probably, I don't know how many men they'd have in a squad, and they would have so many men. There would have probably a corporal or a sergeant leading them, I suppose, and then they would be something like a machine gunners or whatever, you know.
Then describe your
in ours, we were a platoon, and a platoon was and tanks was 5 tanks. And Lieutenant Costello was that he was with us here at this reunion, and he was my platoon leader. Then he came to us just before I was injured over there, so I didn't get to know him that well. But we had 5. Then there were 5 tanks. There was two sections and 2 tanks in each section, and then the platoon leader's tank. Yeah, and then they would work together. Then 2 tanks would pull up, and the other 2 would cover them and fire, and then they would stop, and then the other would come up to them and go by, and kind of hopscotch along. Most of the time. So it's.
And how many men supported the 5 tanks, and how many men?
Well, we had there was 5 men in a tank. Yeah, so we had 25 guys in there, and then we had to go into the company maintenance crew for anything, or for ammunition and for food, everything. We just got. But we operated as a platoon independently. They had us, and Now, when we got overseas, it was a little bit, we were a little different. Our 5 tanks that went in, we were detached from the 12th Armored Division and were assigned to the 397th Infantry Regiment, which was part of the 100th Infantry. And they were guarding the left flank of the 7th Army. And they sent in our 5 tanks there and to help them. We lost 1 tank in there, and we did a lot of shooting in there. So, and most of it was shooting at machine guns at German patrols coming in. And so now, and while we were there, then 40 years later, the guys that were in that 5 tanks that went in there received a presidential citation because the 397th got a presidential citation. So then they added our 5 tanks to it. So my wife had chuckled. She said, "Gee, I didn't know I was married to a hero." But so this, I think probably we were the only ones in the division got the presidential citation, but we didn't get it with the 12th. We got it with the infantry. And I've been trying to contact somebody from that infantry to talk to them. I'm not having much luck though. But I did talk to one of them, but I'll have to. I really don't, as a gunner in a tank, you don't see too much except what you see out the periscope. And see, there's a driver, he gets out once in a while, and he's got a periscope in front of him. And then the assistant driver, he has a periscope, and he has a machine gun that's on a ball that he can use.
Explain not a ball. It's not a ball.
It's a ball. It's just like this, and there's a hole in the middle with a machine gun in it.
Oh.
So it swivels. Okay. And then there's a loader. Oh.
Okay, got a loader.
And then there's the loader, like we were talking, the guy that he said the loader was the best job in the place on the tank, because he was the only one that had any room. When he wanted to sleep, he had room to lay down in there, and nobody else had room to lay down. I was a gunner, and I had a seat, and that's where I stayed. I sat on that seat and looked out. If I wanted to sleep, I laid my head on the traverse mechanism that we used to rotate the turret with. We had a little different from the Germans. We had a power turrets that you just turn the handle and the turret would turn. And then it had a trigger on it so you could just fire as you're swinging around. And
where were you located? Okay, the drivers were here?
No, see, the driver was down on the left sponson, they call it, in front, and the assistant driver, and then the loader was right at my elbow, and then I was on the right side of the turret, and then the gun come between us. And so he had to be open there, and he had to have room, because he'd pick the shell up and he'd ram it home like this with the heel of his hand, and he had to really punch it home to close the breech block on there.
How much ammunition could you carry? How much ammunition did he have room for?
Well, I can't remember. We were talking about that the other day. We had underneath the turret, then we had the 75 millimeter shells were standing up on end. So we must have carried, I don't know, probably 50 rounds of that. Then we carried machine gun. We had to carry a 30 caliber machine gun because we had 2 machine guns. And then we carried 50 caliber ammunition for the, what would he use for to shoot at the airplanes with, and that was up on the turret, up on the top. And I don't think we ever fired that one in combat, the 50 caliber one, but.
When you're, and I'm asking a lot of specific questions.
Okay.
But people are going to hear this tape that don't know one thing about what you're telling. So that's
That's
why I'm
fine.
kind of digging
Yeah.
at you. When you're shooting, you were the gunner. How did you visually see, or did the driver? How did you know where to shoot, or did you have?
You were told.
Okay.
See that now? So the tank commander, he stood right behind my back, and he was leaning against my back, see, and then he'd look out the turret, or he'd close it and look out a periscope, and then he would direct the fire. He'd say, well, whichever way it was, and he had a switch up there. He could swing the turret around, so it'd bring it right in on the target, and he'd say 300 yards, and whether we should fire high explosive or anti-tank ammunition or machine guns, and then we would set it. I had a telescope on there that was illuminated, so I could use it at night or during the day, and then we had the periscope besides. But when you're firing it, the telescope is what we used, and that's the one that was, you'd call it coaxially mounted with the gun, so that when you set the range on the telescope, it was the gun was set right. The only other way you could set the gun would be with the I'm getting old, I can't remember. But like we'd set it then just like the artillery did, see. And you'd set it with the level of the gun. And we did fire that way too. I didn't think we'd ever would, but we did. They did use us as artillery pieces, and they had our tanks mounted on ramps so that they could get the maximum range out of the shells. And
Where did y'all do that at? Do you know the location where you did do that?
no, that was before we went into Herlisheim. It must have been between Herlisheim and Colmar. And problem is in moving around in France, I didn't see much of France, only what I could see through the periscope, see. And the tank commander and the others, they could see better. See, well, the loader, he didn't have any better view of it than I did, but so we had to just go do as we were told, you know. The driver, he's told which way to go by the tank commander, and this type of thing. So it's, I really didn't see that much of France. I didn't know where we were half of the time. Except I knew that when I got injured, I was at Herlisheim. Yeah.
If you were telling me the depth, the width, the depth of where you 5 men were, about how much space are we talking?
Oh, let's see. I was probably about that much. I would say I had about 2 foot on the right side of the gun, and the loader had about 3 foot. The only thing is on the left side of the gun, where the loader was, it was all open from front to rear, see, except when he'd get up and bring up ammunition to put in there, you know. But that's, and then the tank commander was usually, he had a seat that he could sit on right behind me. See. And when I got injured, now that was something else again. It was somebody was looking after me because I got a.
Tell me,
Yeah.
as you're headed towards that story, start us towards Herlisheim and tell us that story of all that. I want to just get, kind of get the whole feel of what was going on.
Well, see, we were at the town of Remling before we went to Herlisheim. No, nobody was injured at Remling, although they did knock out one of our tanks. So, and there we were just, one night I shot all night long. I was shooting at German patrols coming out. which I never thought I'd ever do, was shoot a fire at night. That was a no-no, especially with a cannon, you know. But that gave the enemy, they could pinpoint where you were. And the infantry didn't like us there because we drew the fire, artillery fire, and when we want to go to leave, they didn't like when we left either because they wanted the protection of our guns. So, I mean, it was kind of 6 of one, half a dozen the other. But then when we got to Herlisheim, now, then we only had 4 tanks in our platoon that was left. So, you know, those 4 tanks, then we moved up to a cornfields, and we were, from what we understood, there was no opposition. I mean, as far as big guns. So when we moved up, then there was we moved into a trap. There was one gun on the big anti-tank gun on our left, and a big one on our right, and one right in front of us. So we were picked off by the one in front of us. The last thing I knew when we were just moving up, but then my tank commander saw the gun on the left. He saw movement over there, and he started to swing the turret over to the right. Or the left, and I saw the gun ahead of us. Somebody jump in the hole, so I was going to swing the gun to that one, but he took over with a master switch and swung it around, and about that time we got hit, so I never did get a shot off in there. But then the last thing I knew was a tank ahead of us got shot, and the guys coming out of the turret, as they come out of the turret, they would machine gun them. So that's the last I saw. And then all of a sudden, I was laying in the back of the tank, and I didn't know how the heck I got there. See? But I found out later that what had happened was this gun that got the tank ahead of us, they were dug into the ground. So the barrel was just that 88 was a best gun in the war, that German 88. They laid right on top of the ground, probably 6 inches above the ground, and then when they fired at us, it came, the shot, it was an armor-piercing shell, and it came through the machine gun of the loader, or not the loader, but the assistant driver had, and that ball, the machine gun and the ball, it came right down the barrel of that, and it killed him, and it came right between my legs, and it knocked the seat out from under me, and that threw me out the top. Fortunately, the turret was open. Then it hit my tank commander. He was leaning against my back, and then it come around and killed the loader. So the only one that got out of the tank was the driver and I. So, but like the doctor said, he said, it's just a miracle. He says, somebody's watching out after you, because it's just like the good Lord reached a hand down, pulled me right out of the middle of it. So then now what I received, we call it shrapnel, but what I have in me today even is the pieces of my tank, that seat that I was sitting on, see. And that's I had one piece that's taken out of my right leg, and my left leg was broken. There was a big piece in there, and then I had my rear end. There was 2 little pieces that went into my hip joint, and then the one that probably did the trick that drove me out was one in my butt that just like hitting a red hot poker in your hind side. That's probably what threw me out. But anyway, I come to in the back. I was just probably a second, and I come to in the back of the tank, and I rolled off of the tank, and then I found out I couldn't stand, or I couldn't even crawl. I couldn't use my legs at all. So then I had to drag myself along. But then the driver come out alongside of me, and he asked if I was all right. I says, I'm hitting the legs. And he said, well, he said, the others are all dead. So then we started to head back, to crawl back through the cornfield. There was just a little bit of a dip at the end of the cornfield, and I was going down there. And they had mortar shells. They knew we were there, you know, and they'd fire mortar shells every 10 feet, you know. And I was trying to stay ahead of the mortar shells, so I was, might have been dragging myself, but I was going as fast as running. He said they probably the fastest I ever moved my life. But and then we got about halfway back, and then I met some medics, and they'd been pinned down there by daylight, and they didn't know which way to go. So they wanted to load me on a litter and take me out. I says, no way, I'm going to ride on a litter. I'm going the way I'm going. And you better do the same thing, head down straight ahead to where the way I'm going. And so then they took off ahead of me, and the driver took off ahead of me, and he told the platoon sergeant that I was coming in, how I was coming in. So then he was the only one that had a tank that was in one piece yet, so he run his tank out, and he was running alongside it, and they pulled the tank between me and the enemy, and then he picked me up on his shoulders and carried me out. I guess from what I understand, he recruited somebody coming by to grab the other side, so, and they dragged me back. In the tank ahead of me, they were all killed in that one. And Lieutenant Costello's tank was at the left side of me. The tank was knocked out, but his crew, part of his crew was injured a little, but not bad. And then the platoon sergeant, he got his tank back, and his crew was back. So we had really 10, 12, probably 12 people out of the 25 that came out of there. And from what I understand, the 43rd Tank Battalion was out ahead of us the day before, and they'd lost 13 tanks in the same place. So we never should have been pushed in there, but that's another story again. You can't put the blame on somebody that's dead, you know. So, but that's our company commander was killed in there, and he was responsible for all of us, you know. So I mean, it's and 3 days before I got hit, I wound up in a hospital with frozen feet, and the way we got into the hospital there, my loader had his feet were real bad. He couldn't walk on them hardly. So they took one look at him, and his feet were starting to turn black already. So they evacuated him right away. So then they checked the rest of us out, see. And my feet were so bad, frozen, that I couldn't walk by myself. But I could step on them a little. So then they had me in the hospital there, in a field hospital, in a tent for 3 days, and then my crew didn't want to go without a gunner, so they came and got me, and the medics didn't object because they needed a place for people who had been shot up, you know. So they helped me into the tank, one guy on each side of me, and got me into there, and then the next day I was back through there with holes in me. So, and that was on January the 17th of 1945. But then my mother received 2 telegrams, one on the what was it, about on the 13th, and it said that it said in there that I was injured. Well, that's when they took me in with the frozen feet, see, and then 3 days later it says he was injured again, see. So, so she didn't know what to say. And then the chaplain came and told us, he says, the first thing you want to do is write a letter home to know you're okay, see. And this was their priority. See, so then I had a slow process coming home. Then, see,
Where did they evacuate you to France?
well, the first in the field hospital there, they operated and took the piece of steel out of my right leg, and then the piece of steel in my left leg was sticking out part of it, so they just pulled it out, and then they put a half cast on my left leg, and then they loaded me. That there was a train getting ready to pull out nearby, so they loaded us on the train because the German bombers were coming in. So they loaded us up on the train and got us out of there, and they hauled me into Paris. So I spent probably about a week in Paris in the hospital, and then they, when I was able to travel, then they put me in a litter and hauled me to Orly Field in Paris, and I laid there for 3 days for the weather to clear so they could fly, and then they flew us out on the C-47 cargo planes, and they flew us across the Channel to Kidderminster, England, and that was an experience because they fly right down across the top of the water. You could almost see the waves coming up in there because of they had to get under the radar. So, but that was a good airplane. It was some of them are still flying in South America and around. So. But anyway, then in Kidderminster, then they wanted to get me out of the hospital and into a convalescent center. The original injury shouldn't have been that bad, see, but then they put a cast on my leg there, and they put a walking iron on at the same time. I don't know if you know what a walking iron is. The steel plate underneath it's steel, and then they have two prongs that go into the side, and then the plaster goes round. Well, they didn't leave that cast dry enough before they put that walking iron on. And then they had me sitting up by a stove with my feet up there trying to dry that out. And when they thought it was dry enough, then they sent me to Coventry, England, to convalescent center. And there I had a job. I had a cast on my leg, so I took a job with the Red Cross running an information desk for them there. And which was, I enjoyed that, then I had something to do. And I'm not one that wanted to go drinking or chasing ladies or not even playing cards because I didn't have the money for that. And then, then they fed me there too because the hospital, that food in that place was atrocious. So the Red Cross gave me all the Spam I wanted, and that's the only place I got Spam was from the Red Cross, and donuts and coffee. So for 4 months there I lived on donuts and coffee and Spam. Today I still like donuts, and I like Spam. But I got a chance to, when I was there, then to go to the Shakespeare Memorial Theater there, and I saw 3 Shakespeare plays there, and got up to see the Wedgwood pottery where they make the bone china. And one experience that I kind of liked the best was the little town close by. I don't remember what the name of it was, but every little town there had a black swan inn in it. See, every one of them. So then some little old ladies, I don't know, I call old now, I assume they were about 80 or something, and they invited soldiers in there, and they're going to have a tea for them. See. Well, tea is something my stomach wouldn't tolerate tea, but I had to force it down there because the people were trying to be nice to us, you know, and get there, and then I can remember then the lady, she says, the one sitting next to me, she says, we understand that favorite dessert for an American soldier is lemon pie. See? She says, well, we didn't know what a lemon pie was. We didn't know what a pie was. It's kind of strange to talk the same language and they don't understand what we're talking about. So anyway, she come out with had some kind of a lemon cake or a yellow cake and lemon pudding mixed with it. And, oh, it was good, you know. And I said, oh, this is real good. And she says, is that anything like lemon pie? And I said, no, that's not lemon pie. So she, well, then what is lemon pie? So then they're trying to think of what to say to them, you know. So finally it dawned on me, I says, a lemon pie is a tart this big with lemon in it and then meringue on the top. They knew what meringue was. So, and she says, a tart that big? She couldn't imagine it. But they were nice. I enjoyed the English people. I can't say that much for the French people, but the English people were good. And although I shouldn't say that about the French people either, because the ones that I met, they were good to us. I mean, you know, so that's. But then that's when my trouble started, though. When I was in England in this convalescent center. Coventry was the town that was picked that the Germans completely annihilated. They knocked down every building in town. There was nothing standing. So when we came in there, then they were just starting to rebuild. And I did get to a Rotary luncheon there. They invited some servicemen, so I went. It was in the first building that got restored. And that was nice. I looked for Lady Godiva, but I never did find her in the streets of Coventry. But when the problem started it must have been a couple months after I was or not, maybe not quite that long in England, in Coventry, and they had, in the convalescent center, they only had about 18 doctors, and this was a big place, you know, but they were there recuperating. I mean, they didn't need services usually of a lot of doctors. So then you would go and see some of them, I guess, they were psychiatrists and psychologists. They were using those to decide whether you were sick enough to or needed the attention of one of the doctors. And I would go in every day, and I said, this leg is killing me, see, and the guy would say, well, my leg hurts too, see. So the ladies in the Red Cross could see that I was hurting, so finally they told this to their head Red Cross lady, and I still remember her name was Miss Davies, and they said that she was a personal friend of President Roosevelt's. So when she asked for something, she got it. So she said, this is ridiculous. So she calls up the doctor on duty at night and said that we got this man that needs to see a doctor. And he says, nobody will let him see the doctor. So then he said, well, bring him in. And he said, I'm not an orthopedic doctor, but he says, I'll split his cast for him. They split the cast down that night and gave me crutches to walk on. And then in the morning, then they had me bring in to see the doctor, the orthopedic doctor. And he was a German refugee doctor. In a sense that he was a horse doctor, except that he knew what he was doing. See? And when he pulled that cast off and he looked at it, he goes, ugh, and he lifts my leg up and he smells of it, and he says, you got to use some words I wouldn't repeat. He says, you've got gangrene in there. He says, and that leg's going to have to come off. And he says, there's no reason. He says, you're in a hospital, see, in a convalescent center. So I said, well, they wouldn't let me come and see him. So then he started in and he started calling everybody in the hospital and started raking them over the coals. And then he thought for a while, and he says, I saw a process used in Germany before the war here, and when I was in medical training, and he says, and half the people it works, the other half it doesn't work. So he says, we'll know, we can try it, we'll know inside of 12 hours whether it's going to work, and if it doesn't, then it's time to take the leg off. So so they put this thing on my leg, and the boot, and then right away it started drawing the poison out, you know. Then this guy, same guy that wouldn't let me see the doctor, then he got excited, then he calls the doctor. And the doctor said, oh good, that's working. So
What is a boot?
it was a boot. It was called an Unna-boot, UNNA. And I guess it was a Norwegian doctor by the name of Una that developed this thing. And it's just like a cast, the gauze, you know, only it wasn't dipped in plaster. It was some kind of a rubbery type of thing. So it was just like rubber on your leg, you know. But my leg had healed enough so that this would be sufficient. And then, but the only problem was I had this open wound on the leg yet, and then they had to put this on hot. They had to melt this cube of stuff and put it in and melt it, and then he would put a 4x4 in there, and he'd slap that right on the open cut. I would jump about 3 feet. And and for 12 hours I was just in total misery. So, and he didn't believe in painkillers. You know, he says, you're supposed to be a man, you should be able to tolerate this. So anyway, every 7 days I had to go through this, change it. And so for about 2 months, and after that, well then the leg started to heal, and then it doesn't bother, you know, so much. But that was my first experience with this Unna-boot. Probably I was one of the first soldiers over there that ever wore anything like that. Yeah, and then since then they've used that, but now they use it. It's a cold process. They put it on, and it's called. They use it a lot of names for it. Jelly cast is one of them, and it's wrapped up in it. It's cold. You wrap it on the leg, and it's no problem with it today. But and those first ones, they were awful. And I've had kidney stones that didn't hurt half as much. See, so it did hurt. So unfortunately, that doctor, he might have been a horse doctor, whatever we call him, but today I still have my leg. And I have problems with it. I've had problems with it all over the years, you know, but I've used some strange contraptions today. But they try to keep the swelling out of my legs. And so it's...
Were you over there the whole time, or did they send you back home in time, or did you go back to the unit?
No, see, well, on the way over, we'll backtrack a little. On the way over, when we left Camp Shanks, then we traveled in troop transports over, and they were supposed to bring us into Le Havre, France. Well, everything was jammed up in Le Havre, so they brought us into Liverpool, and they dumped us off the ship there, and then they put us on a train, but then they didn't have no place to put us. So then I think it must have 2-3 days they had us riding around on this train. Finally, they dumped us at a place called Tidworth Barracks in the Salisbury Plains. And so then we spent the rest of the time that before we went over to France there. And then when they got ready to leave there, I can't remember how long we were in Tidworth Barracks, and then we went down to Southampton and loaded on LSTs, and then when I up to Lahar, France, and then went up the Seine River to a place called Rowan, and then we got off to LSTs, and then we went up through Nancy and up to the front lines. And Nancy, that was our last stop of freedom stop, kind of it. They had a big dance there on a Saturday night. And they got the girls from all over the neighborhood there, you know, and so they had a big wing thing there. But I never could get the hang of it. The dances, we had the same kind of dances, except that their beats seemed to be different. It didn't work out. But we enjoyed it anyway, and that was our last. From then on, it was all security, combat zone, and always worried about. At night, you're waiting for daylight to come because it's dreadful at night, and because the German patrols would be coming through there, and then during the day, at night, and in the morning, then you wait for night to come because you can see it during the day. So it was kind of I don't know which was worse, really.
Did y'all sleep in, no, you didn't sleep in the tank. Y'all got out and slept
Well,
in the
I
tents?
slept in the tank most of the time.
Did you?
And
Was
there
it
was
warmer? Was it
not
warmer?
all the time. We were in this one town, I forget the name of it, and we had the tanks lined up at the edge of the town, and this was just our platoon. And we had 2 men on the tank always. The others went and slept. Okay.
Wait,
So-
what, slop?
Slept.
Slept, I'm sorry.
Okay, slept.
Okay, slept, okay.
But anyway, we had let's see, it was the assistant driver and I were on the tank, and I had my head out of the turret, and we used to sit there when they're that way, so you never know when the Germans are coming up between you. So I had a hand grenade in each hand, and my thumb through the pin so I could flip them out and throw it, see. And and all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, we heard the burp guns going, and the Germans had their little hand machine gun, and go, you know, and you can't miss the sound, you know. So then we could hear them firing their burp guns, so I told them to start the engines up, we're moving out, you know, and so then we'd always back our tanks out in the open so that you could see, so nobody could get up close to you, you know. And I can remember we had it cranked up, and we're just starting to move out, and here our driver come running out, pulling his pants up, and he was hollering at us, cussing, "You gonna leave me?" So then he jumped up on the tank, and we got back. Then the 4 tanks got back, and then the 5th one didn't come back, see, and so then we trained our guns on the 5th tank, because then if the Germans got it, we were going to have to shoot them. So then we waited until the guy started the tank up, and as soon as he started the tank up, I knew who was driving, see, the way he did it. See. So then we all gave a sigh of relief, because and then that tank then hauled out all the guys that were sleeping that didn't make their own tank. So then he come back. But there's a lot of things like that going on.
As you look back through your war experiences, what did you learn about yourself that you might not have
Then I was a
realized?
fraidy cat.
Weren't most guys fraidy cats?
Well, I
That's
guess
it.
I learned that I was stubborn enough to outstand my fear. Yeah. So it's, I never ran. That was what I always worried about. You know, and you never know if you're going to turn around and run. And we had a few of them that did. You know, but it's, course, I was in a place I couldn't run.
Yeah.
So it's,
Are there some things that you learned that have made a difference in your life later on?
yeah, I learned that I never wanted to see a gun again. And so I never carried guns in the house except the old .22 rifle we used to hunt squirrels with in the old days. And so my kids never grew up with guns, really. Grandpa, he had the shotguns and that, but I guess we learned the value of freedom probably, and people can't see that, unless you're in the middle of it, If you don't have any freedom, you've been like we had money in our pocket when we were in France, but there was no place to spend it. I mean, the people there didn't have any food for themselves, much less if we wanted to get food from them, we just about had to steal it, They were getting things from us, cigarettes and rations and that, So it's, I guess we learned what it was to be hungry. And the war's an awful thing. Although you sometimes wonder if we thought that by these reunions we have with that, because they're all talking about the old days. But I found that the more that you can talk about it, the less it's going to bother you. See, a lot of these people, I mean, they just keep it to themselves, and they stew and stew until they finally go off their rocker, It's an experience, like I said, I was glad that I was there, but I wouldn't want to do it again. The word's not right. It's not glad. I wasn't glad. I don't know what the word you'd use. It's just it's your place. You belong there. See, and we believed we belonged there because of Hitler, So and that proved to be right, and I think that's the problem that they have with Korea and Vietnam, and that of course, I don't look at it the way they do there. I says the Korean veterans and the Vietnam veterans are veterans, We're all veterans. I can't see there's any difference, really. But I guess unless I was in one of them other places, I couldn't see it, but they feel like they're second-rate citizens or something. That I can't understand, I says. Because you fought in Vietnam or Korea or someplace, you're just as good as anybody else, And I guess maybe this is something they teach you too, and there's tolerance for people. I mean, you learn to get along in the Army with all kinds of people. You find out someone you like, someone you don't like, but you still have to get along with them. And that helps you in later life. Before I left the service, and then they gave us training to demilitarize us, get us ready for civilian life again. They had we would get in the hospital, and I got discharged from Percy Jones Hospital in Michigan and Battle Creek, and they had the advertising company would send in people, and they would explain the theory of advertising, and they would photography. They'd teach anything you wanted to know, and so we were going to school all the time, in a sense of the word, before I got out of the service. Different things. You kind of picked. You had to take so many of them, and you picked whichever you wanted to do. See, and so Then one day they said, would you take a medical discharge if we gave you one? I says, give it to me. And that was it.
How long were you, you went to the hospital, you worked for the Red Cross. So how long between the time that you were wounded and the time you got back home and got your discharge?
A year and 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah, I was in I was different hospitals
And you reached home when? What was the date that you
Oh,
got home?
what was it, in 19? 3 months, let's see. Well, I think it must have been in June of 46 or middle of 46 anyway. So, and I can't remember what month it was now. But
You have experienced a lot of physical problems because
over
of,
the years,
over
oh
the
yeah,
years.
I've been in and out of the Veterans Hospital. My kids, they all knew the elevator operators and everybody there. My wife would take the kids and load them in a car, and she'd come to see me every day I was in there. So,
So you were married before you went over?
No,
No, okay.
I was married in 1947.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
But through the years.
She was a gift from God. Yeah, she took care of me real good.
What was her name?
Dorothy. Yeah, and she wanted 12 children, because she only had one brother and he was crippled up, and so she settled for 7. So,
Tell me the names of your children and their ages, if you can do that. Or just tell me the names of the children.
well, there's John. He's sitting behind you, John D. And he's the only one I know when he was born, see, because he was born in 1948. So, but anyway, then 2 years later, then my daughter Sandra was born, and then 9 months later, my daughter Linda was born, and then 2 years later, daughter Sheila was born, and then 2 years later, I think Joe comes in there, my other son. And then 2 years later, then my daughter Mary. And then it was about 5 years later, the trailer. She was Debbie. Yeah. So it's, and they all come from, we never had any money in our house, but the one thing we had was love in the house, and we enjoyed life always. So we did a lot of things in spite of not having money, so it's, the kids, they had to get their own education. John has a degree in electrical engineering. And Sandy, she had 2 years of junior college, and that's all she wanted. Out of all of them, one of them was, she's nursing, the middle one, Sheila. She has a degree in hospital administration. And their daughter Mary, she didn't want any schooling. She just wanted to be out on her own. And I think she regrets this today, but she still doesn't have the schooling. But then the youngest one, she went to the Lutheran Bible Institute in Seattle and religion, and she became a missionary over in Africa, Kenya. But she's now out of the mission field. She's home in Montana. But all of them are married, and they more or less got the education they wanted. And then Joe, our other son, then he had 2 years at Bemidji and up in northern Minnesota. He was a big, tall guy. He played basketball up there. But then he dropped out of school and he went to work so that his wife could finish her education, and she became a nurse. So he never did go back to school, so he's got his education the hard way. So if I die today, I've had a full life. I have no regrets, no. There's some things I probably would have been different if I had a choice, but more money is not one of them. So, of course, I live better today than I ever have, so I mean.
If you were to think about somebody pulling this tape off of a shelf in 30 years, maybe your great-grandchildren, what would be a message you would leave for them?
I don't know, it's just love your neighbors yourself. Love people. Enjoy people. Enjoy life. Leave your bitterness someplace else. So we enjoy life wherever we go, whatever we do. And there's nothing better. Kind of remember why you're on earth. That's all. I have a nice family. A lot of people comment on it that they wish their families were that way. My families, they might not believe what I do is right, but they all support me. See? To go to the reunions, I'm not physically able to go by myself, so then, like John goes with me now, and then a couple of years ago, his son and I went to, well, that's when we met you, and then when they were down in Schaumburg, Illinois here, then both my sons were here. Then my son Joe, his son was here, so there was the four of us here. And, so this is the way it goes. My daughter sent her daughter with me a couple of months ago here down to Texas to see my daughter that lives down there, and they sent. She's 15 years old, and she was looking after me then. But next to my oldest daughter, then there was her mother. Then went with me out and to Montana for my birthday and christening of my new grandchild out there. And, so they take me all around. They let me run loose, but I mean, they just make sure I keep out of trouble and keep walking. In Louisville, that was the first year after my wife died. I had well, in the middle of the reunion, I took real sick. And, of course, that was the one when Costello was running the reunion there. He put it together, and he was my platoon leader. So the day before the reunion started, he picked me up and brought me into the hotel at the airport, and then I took sick. So, and when I left, then he hauled me out to the airport to make sure I got on the plane. And then my daughter met me at the plane and took me into the doctor. They said I had fluid on my heart and lungs and congestion. What do you call it? The heart failure, anyway. So, anyway, it's always something. But in spite of everything, all the injuries, I've had a life that's totally unexpected as a teenager. I couldn't accept responsibility in the beginning, and when I got married, my wife taught me to accept responsibility, and I've learned not to walk away from any responsibility. So I've served in just about everything, in the church and the community, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Kiwanis, PTAs, everything. But anyway, it's She changed my whole life, got changed around by a woman, you know. Even that's what the Bible says, you know, that a good woman is worth more than all the gold there is. That's true. That's true. I don't know if there's much else to say, really.
I've kind of asked all my questions unless there's something I haven't asked you or we've not covered.
No, there's experiences along the way, like in Camp Campbell, you know, we always stretched everything, you know. We had a weekend pass, and we had an overnight pass, but then we weren't supposed to go only so many miles from town, you know, so that's, but we were down in Hopkinsville there, and then we'd grab a train and go up to Minneapolis, see, because we had the overnight pass, and that would be, so I traveled home on the train. I was home for 4 hours and turned around and got on the train and went back. It was worth coming home just for 4 hours. Of course, then the woman that I later married, she was there at that 4 hours, you know. So, and my family, they thought the world of my wife, and so, I mean, it's.
So did y'all correspond? Y'all were,
We corresponded. I met her in 1942 when I was in the service.
oh,
I was home on leave, and some friends invited me over, and they said, "Don't bring no girl along." He says, "We want you to meet somebody." So I met her, and then after I left, they asked her what she thought. She says, "Oh, ish," but she did marry me. I was just skin and bone when I got out of the service. I weighed 125 pounds, and I'm 6'2", and now I weigh 270. So I mean, but that's about it.
well, I sure appreciate you coming and spending time with me and doing this.
So that's. Yeah, it was nice that we met you in St. Louis. And so it's, I didn't think you'd remember us.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Trying to forget.
So.
We're a couple of raunchy characters, you know.
Yeah. But anyway, we appreciate all you did, and you've had a life of pain because of what you did for us, but we appreciate it.
Well, it's, yeah, I spent several years, if you put it all together, in the hospital, in the vet's hospital, from, 3 months here and 3 months there and 6 months. So it's, you make a lot of mistakes along the way. They wanted to give me more money, and I said, "I don't want the money." I said, I want something done to my legs to fix me up, you know. So in the end, I wound up not getting the legs fixed up and not getting the money. So I should have taken the money with it. Get it. So it's.
Well, okay, we're going to close this down, and thanks.